In it here now, I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna been on here now, who bid $500,000 bid.
Welcome to the Legacy of Agriculture. This program will explore the past, present, and future of agriculture. We'll look at the people, products, and events that have formed its history. And now with today's guest, your host, Chris Bair.
Good morning, everybody. This is Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. And today, Kyle Waller and I are getting more windshield time. Don't worry if you're listening to the radio. I am not driving. However, if you're joining us on Apple, Spotify, and now YouTube, you can look at our shows and go back to any of the shows over the last almost 2 years that we've been doing this. But we're sitting in the cab of the pickup and we're trying something new and recording our show here. Kyle, it's good to have you on board.
Oh, it's great to be on the show with you today, Chris. A little windshield time here, and I'm excited to be on the show today.
As many hundreds of thousands of miles I've driven over the years, it's nice to be a passenger.
Yeah, every now and then it's nice to be able to sit in that seat on that side. You don't have to worry about anything.
You know, we've got some exciting news. The guys up in our North Dakota division out of the Bowman office did a live farm retirement auction yesterday and had a combine that is going all the way to Brazil.
Going to Brazil. Yep, all the way to Brazil.
The live auctions are absolutely going through the roof right now, especially on the good retirement auctions. We hear a lot in the media right now about how depressed the market is, how tough things are. But when you have a live auction with live auctioneers and you combine all of the technology, and that technology is complementing the auctioneer, and I'll say it again, an auction should never replace the auctioneer. He should only complement the auctioneer, and those guys did good yesterday.
Those guys had a great day yesterday. You know, I mean, it's just proven facts right now, Chris, with live auctions going on out there, and you're adding the technology side to it. They are just outweighing anything else right now, and it's amazing to see where equipment is going to right now with auctions. It's going all over.
Just 5 years ago, when we started at Piper south of Sioux Falls, now our company is celebrating our 25th anniversary of being in the auction industry and in the auction business. And in Sioux Falls, we're going to be celebrating our 5th year this fall. It's been a great ride, and a testament to these live auctions where you can go into a theater or you can go into a live auction setting. Just our May sale alone, which is not our biggest sale of the year. We're getting ready for our May sale on May 13th, and we've got almost 900 lots, and we had to go to a third online only ring because rings 1 and 2 for the live auction were full.
Yeah, you know, it's looking to be a great sale. Ring 1's, filled up with some really nice equipment. We got a nice line of skid steers and some construction equipment. We've got a lot of nice vehicles coming in here too for the sale, and you know, it's a little bit of everything for everybody there on the sale on Ring 1. Ring 2, we've got some small over palletized items there. Looking at 2, we got a huge lineup of building materials, anything from 2x4s all the way up to doors and windows and shingles and that. And then Ring 3, we've got some really nice collector toys. We got some cat collector toys there. We also got some implement toys and some trucks and vehicles. So those are all going to be in that Ring 3 timed online sale.
The gentleman that is selling the items in Ring 3, it's actually for an estate. And that gentleman that bought and acquired all of these toys was actually a Caterpillar salesman, and over the years he collected these toys. And these are not the plastic toys, these are the die cast, these are the steel toys that are still
nice
in the box. They're still in the boxes.
Yeah, they're, you know, when I was going through the boxes there with Jasmine there at the office, you know, the amount of really quality in the box, older collectible toys that are there, and it's pretty amazing. You don't find those good solid ones like you do anymore.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. You know, this business, Kyle, you've been in it for a long time. You were raised on a farm, a dairy kid. I was a farm kid, raised on a potato farm. when we start talking about farm machinery and we start talking about farmland and even crazy things like toy tractors, it's a lot of fun. People look at us weird, like, what's wrong with you?
Well, they do, you know. I remember growing up, you know, where I grew up in north central Nebraska, you know, as a little kid, you know, a couple of my boys' age, you know, and that, you spent a lot of time just playing in the sand with toys, you know, until you got old enough that then you got put to work on the farm, you know.
We didn't have a sandbox on the farm. We actually, and bless my mother's soul, we always played in the she called them the flower beds, but she didn't grow flowers there. Those were where she grew the tomatoes, and as soon as those tomatoes were off in the summertime, my little sister and I, we were in the flower beds digging around, and we hauled a lot of dirt.
Yeah, and you know, I was the oldest of four, and I remember too, you know, we had a little spot behind the house where it was kind of just a little sand. It wasn't even a sandbox. It was just a little spot where we played at. And, you know, to this day, my grandpa and mom and them still laugh about this. You know, I always got mad at my sister because you always walk through while I was planting my corn with my toy tractors all the time.
Then they walk through and they mess up the rows.
And then you got to replant it again. So I guess it was just about like learning what goes on in farming today is when you get, you know, natural disasters with too much rain and everything like that. I guess you learn it at a young age. So
as I got older, my dad bought my little sister and I a toy pedal tractor, a John Deere, one of the old steel ones, and he put a piece of lath across the back of it, and in front of the garage was a piece of concrete, and we would pretend that was the sprayer on my dad's old 4020 that he used to spray with the 4020, and had the John Deere saddle tanks and the rear mount booms. And I can't tell you how many times in my mind I sprayed that piece of concrete to make sure that the kosher weeds and the thistles were growing.
You always got to get it all sprayed. So, yep, I remember those days all the time as a kid. And then, you know, you finally got old enough to where you got put to work at that point.
Speaking about old times and old time tractors,
you had an interesting trip here just a week or two ago. You went over to Indiana, is that correct?
Illinois. Greenville, Illinois.
And it sounds like to me you were over there. You met with the Oliver girl, is that correct?
Yep, Sherry Schaefer. On last week's episode of The Legacy of Agriculture, we did an entire segment with Sherry Schaefer, and she's known as the Oliver girl, Oliver Magazine, the Heritage Magazine, and she's the publisher of several different magazines. And it was really interesting to be with Sherry because Sherry has collected and kept so much literature about all the aspects of agriculture, and she had in her office, she has several different rooms that are just jam-packed full of literature. I was shocked at the amount of literature from everything from John Deere to International to Case to Allis-Chalmers to even back into the early 1900s, but she has been collecting literature and brochures and sales information and factory build sheets and everything that you can imagine. And it was super interesting to be with Sherry and spend that time. My friend, a friend of mine, Mike Nelson, went with me. He reminds me a lot of my dad and has a lot of the same mannerisms, and we absolutely had a great time in Greenville, Illinois.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys had a great time, and I know you had come back and you had a whole bunch of information you were kind of quizzing me on too. You know, some old International, as I grew up as, you know, around the red tractors and International stuff, New Holland stuff. You had some interesting facts that you had brought back too on some things. You know, the Jimmy Diesel was one of those questions.
Hey folks, we're coming down to the end of our first segment of The Legacy of Agriculture. We're going to be right back. We're going to take a commercial break and we're going to be right back with Kyle. Hold on just a second.
Hi, this is Jasmine at Pfeiffer's Auction Realty and Land Management. Pfeiffer's offers multiple ways to bid and buy at our equipment and land auctions. You can bid online, in person, or place pre-bids before the sale even starts. By providing convenient bidding platforms, we make sure that you can buy the items or parcels you want the way you want to. Visit Pfeiffer's.com to see a complete list of our auctions. When it comes to bidding, go with Pfeiffer's. Nobody does it better.
Hey folks, we're back with our second segment of the Legacy of Agriculture. I'm with my good friend and team member Kyle Waller. We're traveling down the road today. I'm in the co-pilot seat doing the recording, and we're talking about Legacy of Agriculture. And on last week's show, we were talking about a trip that I took with my friend Mike Nelson over to Greenville, Illinois, and met with Sherry Schaefer, the Oliver girl. And as she was digging through some of the brochures and some of the information that she had, it was really interesting. We came across some literature that I want to talk about. But the purpose of that trip, Kyle, is as I had told you on our Sioux Falls team, is that she had found and acquired a one-of-a-kind Oliver Super 77 tractor built in the late 50s that had a GM engine in it. And it was the only Super 77 that was known in existence.
That is true, and that's pretty cool. You know, you hear some of these stories, and this is why the Legacy of Agriculture is always interesting to listen to and be a part of. Is there are stories like this, Chris, that not everybody gets to know.
Yep.
I mean, where do you get to find a Super 77 with a GM diesel engine in it?
There's only one.
There's the one. That's it.
and if you want to learn about how she acquired this tractor, go to last week's episode of the Legacy of Agriculture, and Sherry lays that out, how she acquired that. And at that time, there were 3 Super 88s that got I can't remember if they were 471s or 451 Detroits that were put in them. And there's 2 of them that are known in existence right now. They don't know where the third one is. But Sherry, when she found that Super 77, she was able to verify that through the Floyd County Museum, which has acquired and has kept all of the Oliver records. And not only did she find this tractor at the Floyd County Museum, but she also has negative photos that was taken of that tractor when they were installing that engine. And I want to, this is, and the 2 weeks since I've been there, it's been really interesting. And one of the questions that I asked Sherry was how in the world did these Detroit engines wind up in these Oliver tractors? And the answer that she gave was surprising to me. I thought that this was a venture that Oliver pursued Detroit on to get these engines in these tractors, but it really wasn't. At that time, they were putting Detroits in the Super 99s and the 990 Oliver tractors, and there was a handful of tractors that had these Detroits. Even John Deere put a 2-cylinder Detroit in quite a few of the John Deere 435 tractors, which we've sold a couple of those in the last few years. Very hard to find. But Sherry's answer to why these supers received those Detroit engines was that it wasn't Oliver that was pursuing putting these engines in. It was actually GM out of Michigan that was pursuing some of the manufacturers at that time of putting Oliver in or Detroit engines in several of these tractors. And I said, hey, hold on just a second, Sherry. I says, if GM was putting these Detroit engines in some of these tractors in the 50s, what other manufacturers were in? And she opened up the drawer, and I've actually got this in my hands right now, and I'm going to read some of this to you. Her response to that was it wasn't the manufacturers pursuing the Detroit engine. It was actually GM that was building these Detroit diesels that were pursuing the manufacturers, and they actually brought these engines down to the manufacturers and installed them as factory installed engines as demos. They wanted, and at that time, and we've talked about the internal combustion engine and how the internal combustion engine completely changed the face of agriculture, clear all the way from the early 1900s all the way to date. But the one thing that we found out that was really interesting, and Sherry said that Detroit actually put a GM Detroit engine in a farm all age tractor. I said, you've got to be kidding me. I says, is that tractor known in existence? She does not know if that Farmall H with the factory installed Detroit engine is still in existence.
So so they put a Detroit engine in a Farmall?
Her understanding and our understanding is that GM went to Farmall and they put, and I don't know whether that was a 2-cylinder or a 3-cylinder engine in a Farmall H tractor. Only one.
Was it the H or the M, Chris?
You know what? You're
I
right.
think
It
it's
was
the M.
the M. The H wouldn't be heavy enough. But the Farmall M tractor is the one that received that Detroit engine, and that was installed by Detroit at the factory.
Wow, that's pretty great.
There's also some of the smaller Alles-Chalmers, and right off the top of her head, she couldn't remember, but there was an Alles-Chalmers tractor that also got a Detroit engine in it as well. And I said, can you show that to me? And she pulled a drawer open, and there was drawers full of engineering brochures from engineering companies that had talked a little bit about all of the places that Detroit was putting these engines in. And I'm going to go over, she made me some copies, some copies. And of course, we know that the GM engine was put into the Oliver Super 99. And the big deal at that time was diesel engines had not really entered into the agricultural market. Kerosene engines that were multi-fuel engines where you could burn kerosene, you could burn gasoline, you could burn diesel fuel, anywhere you could get burnable fuel that had a high enough ignition to it was put into these tractors. But nothing that was ever a real true diesel engine that ran just on diesel fuel until Detroit came up with this engine. And Detroit was putting engines in anything that they could, especially in the construction world. They were putting them in stationary engines. They were trying to get into agricultural tractors, but they were putting them in scrapers. They were putting them in forklifts. Any application that they could find, they were selling that engine into that market.
That's crazy. That goes to show, and as you and me have talked about this multiple times, from the 50s to the 60s, and then through now to where we're at with tractors and equipment, the 50s and 60s were huge for a lot of these manufacturers at that point to start that big jump to where we're at now.
Well, not only that, Kyle, but GM was going to these manufacturers, and GM was going out into the marketplace saying, hey, if you've got a gas tractor, we'll convert that gas tractor to a GM diesel engine. And that was part of the purpose in doing this at the factory is will this work and can we do it? Now, I don't know if there was a lot of conversions that took place from a gas engine to a diesel engine. I think the concept was a little bit before its time. But however, GM was really pushing in that market. And one of the major selling points in all of the GM and Detroit literature was that these engines were fuel efficient, that you could run diesel fuel is a lot cheaper, and also for horsepower, they were more horsepower and they were more fuel efficient. That Detroit engine would run longer on a gallon of diesel than a gas tractor would, and more horsepower.
Yep, that makes sense.
But they were a lot heavier.
They were definitely heavy.
So some of the applications, we're going to get into some of the applications in the third segment. As we're coming down to the end of the second segment of the Legacy of Agriculture, we'd like to give a shout out to our sponsors, Pfeiffer Auction and Realty, for a complete listing of all of the auctions that they've got in the summer of 2025. You'll want to go to Pfeiffers.com or give us a call at our Sioux Falls location, 605-836-2277. Pfeiffers. Also want to give a shout out to Richard's Repair out of Larchwood, Iowa, is one of our major sponsors. We appreciate them for being a sponsor. And we're going to be right back with segment number 3 with the Legacy of Agriculture.
Hey, this is Jasmine at Pfeiffer's Auction, Realty, and Land Management. Pfeiffer's offers multiple ways to bid and buy at our equipment and land auctions. You can bid online, in person, or place pre-bids before the sale even starts. By providing convenient bidding platforms, we make sure that you can buy the items or parcels you want the way you want to. Visit Pifers.com to see a complete list of our auctions. When it comes to bidding, go with Pifers. Nobody does it better.
Good morning, everybody. Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. We're in our third segment of the Legacy of Agriculture, and with Kyle Waller, we're rolling down the road. We got some windshield time today. We're going to meet with a great customer today that has called us and says, hey, come talk to me. We got machinery to sell.
Yep.
So we are on the road, and we're talking about, on the heels of a trip that I took to Greenville, Illinois a couple of weeks ago and met with Sherry Schaefer, the Oliver girl, and talking about the Detroit diesel engine. And the Detroit engine back in the 50s, it's always interesting for me, Kyle, to go back and read old literature and some of the things that they were pitching potential buyers on. And again, it really hasn't changed over the last 75 years. Is as more fuel efficient. I wonder how they set that standard, because if every generation of tractor or every change in model is more efficient, theoretically you should be able to run an engine for 10 years on a quart of diesel fuel.
Well, that'd be nice, wouldn't it? We know it takes a lot more than that to be able to use these tractors that we have now today too. But no, it's been an interesting conversation, with, talking with you about all the literature that you had found and different things that the GM Detroit diesel motor was put in, and yes, at that time, to go to a diesel motor that was more fuel efficient, that had more power, and did weigh a little bit more too, which is sometimes not a bad thing too if you're plowing or disking or doing that stuff too, to where that's what starts everything, and you look at, you come into the power shift transmissions and automatic transmissions, and everything was a manual, and then now you have that advantage to everything too going forward. It just changes a lot of how machinery came from one place to the other. And you go back and look too, we were talking about, you take machinery, it's just like the auction business. Auctions have been happening, live auctions have been going on for hundreds of thousands of years through trade and all that too. So, it's just like equipment. It just keeps getting better as you go.
So I'm gonna read some of from this engineering brochure that I got. I want to read some of the applications and some of the comments that were really interesting. So in some of the literature that Sherry had copied to me, she said, and this is from a guy in North Dakota, and it's got a picture of, it looks like to me it's a DC case tractor or something similar. The old cast iron radiator case tractor actually has a 3-cylinder Detroit in it. So obviously that was a conversion. And this is from Judson, North Dakota. This comment says, wouldn't trade my GM diesel for 2 gasoline tractors. I can plow 10 acres more per day. Last year's fuel costs were $1,500. This year, $500. It's better than the old steamers for thrashings. Judson, North Dakota.
And there you go. There's another, you take that part of it too, Chris. You go from steam engines to gas to diesel. I mean, that's a huge change too,
Well, I absolutely love this, where he says, I could plow 10 acres more a day. That was a big deal in the 50s.
10 acres in the 50s was a huge amount of ground to be able to get plowed or disked, back then. And you just take that and you think about it now, as machinery's gotten bigger, these guys look at thousands of acres or hundreds of acres a day, that now they can plow more.
Yep. All right, this one, I know I didn't tell you about this one, so this is interesting. Do you remember the Holt thrashing machine, self-propelled thrashing machine that originally came out of California? What was it, in the 20s?
20s, I think. 20s.
The 1920s. They actually put a diesel, or a Detroit diesel, in one of those Holt thrashing machines in California. So listen to the customer comment after they had installed a GM 371, which was a 3-cylinder, about 75 horsepower, in this Holt thrashing machine. It says, combination harvester and thrasher powered by 2 GM 371 diesels. cut fuel costs in half for Sacramento Valley rice grower who formerly used gasoline engines. Machines can be used in wettest seasons. GM Diesel's quick start out of Woodland, California back in the 50s.
Wow.
Okay, so now we're going to go to one of my favorites from Corral, Michigan. Oliver Super 99, powered by GM 371 diesel, plows and drags 30 acres per day through sod not formally plowed. Plows 5 16-inch bottom plows and a clodbuster. Tractor also drives 800 gallon per minute irrigation pump, saving costs of a separate engine. So not only were they using these GM diesels in thrashing machines, forklifts, construction equipment, tractors, but they're also using them on irrigation pumps, which, just think of how many more hours the longevity of a Detroit diesel over just a gas engine for irrigation.
That's a lot. I mean, you know, you take a standard gas engine, the longevity, you know, normally on a diesel you get 2 to 3 times the amount of longevity out of it as you can a gas plant.
All right, here's one. Here I'm going to pitch a fastball at you. Here
we go.
This came out of Minot, North Dakota, and it's kind of interesting that these Detroits were probably the most popular in South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, because they were very vast areas. Fuel costs were very high. Here's one out of Minot, North Dakota. Harvest 20% faster at half the fuel cost. GM diesel powered unit harvests and chops 150 tons of alfalfa on fuel costs of only $9.90 per 20-hour day, compared to the gasoline power saves $1,000 a season on fuel alone. And the picture on this, in this brochure, is they had put a Detroit diesel in a forage chopper.
Wow.
Minot, North Dakota.
You just blew my mind on that one. Yeah, I mean, well, you think about, you know, now you take a forage cutter now, a forage cutter back then, you put a diesel engine in a forage cutter back then, that was probably the cat's meow for a lot of those guys going down the road, you know.
You know, in today's combines and the big 4-wheel drive tractors, 200-gallon fuel tanks, 250-gallon, 300-gallon fuel tanks. Back in the day, 300 gallons of fuel, they were probably did an entire crop harvesting on 300 gallons of fuel, where today's combine will burn 300 gallons of fuel a day.
Yep.
All right, folks, we're coming down to the end of the third segment of the Legacy of Agriculture. Kyle Waller is with me. For a complete listing of all of our spring and summer auctions, you'll go to Pifers.com. That's P-I-F-E-R-S. Pifers. Nobody does it better.
Hey, this is Jasmine at Pifers Auction, Realty, and Land Management. Pifers offers multiple ways to bid and buy at our equipment and land auctions. You can bid online, in person, or place pre-bids before the sale even starts. By providing convenient bidding platforms, we make sure that you can buy the items or parcels you want the way you want to. Visit Pifers.com to see a complete list of our auctions. When it comes to bidding, go with Pifers. Nobody does it better.
Hey folks, I'm Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. Thank you for joining us on your busy day. We're recording WNX Radio and also Apple, Spotify, and now YouTube. So Kyle, we're kind of in the middle of this discussion of the transition from the gas combustion engine to the diesel engine in the 50s. And GM, as a manufacturer of the Detroit diesel engine, was really making some headways. But the one thing that's really interesting to me is that the type of marketing and the sales pitch has not really changed over the years. And we kind of got a laugh in the second and third segment talking about fuel efficiency. If fuel efficiency had continued to change at the rate that everybody has claimed it has over the last 75 years, you should be able to run an engine on a gallon of diesel for 2 weeks.
Yeah, it'd be nice to be able to do that, you know. We'd probably see a lot more people driving diesels everywhere, but you know, it's the amount of change has just been crazy though, from, you know, what in the 50s and 60s and the efficiency compared to what it is now today too. You know, there's a lot of efficiency in a lot of the tractors and the combines. I mean, you got to take in consideration too, you know, what those how much more work they're getting done compared to what they were getting done back in the 50s and 60s too. You know, if you're using a 3-bottom plow versus now, you know, you watch videos out there on YouTube and that, you know, you got guys up in Montana using Big Bud, and they got how many bull bore plows on there, and they're going across these big wheat fields, and it's all changed throughout the whole process of that too. And but the thing is though, diesel engines really haven't changed a lot though from then to what they are now.
The general the combustion chamber and the purpose behind it has not changed. The technology and the refining of the machine has definitely changed. It has created electronics technology has completely changed. I mean, take a look at that Detroit engine back in the 50s and the 60s versus the diesel engine today. They don't even compel in comparison. I get a kick out of it because I am an old tractor junkie, and you take those tractors that ran on the only electronics that you had that you could even begin to classify as electronics on a diesel engine back in that age was as the amp meter that was metering the voltage going into the batteries, and that was it, because your oil pressure gauge was oil driven, your shutoff was mechanical, your accelerator was mechanical, every single thing. Even your tachometer was
fuel pumps were mechanical too at that point.
Fuel pumps were mechanical, and those diesel engines are a pull shut off. You were actually shutting the fuel off to the combustion chamber. Everything was mechanical on it, to where today when you look at a diesel engine, everything is electronic. Everything is controlled, and a lot of it is wireless now.
Yep.
Everything is wireless. But I want to talk a little bit about the marketing. And they gave 6 different segments on this marketing material that came from Sherry's archives. Was you can save time. You can save time if you have a Detroit engine.
Yep.
The 2-cylinder diesel gets work done in less time because it is faster accelerating, responds to sudden heavy loads with a snap and alertness gasoline engines and most other diesels can't match.
Same marketing you see out there today.
Same mistake. Save on manpower is what the brochure says. It says the GM Detroit diesel powered tractor tiller, harvester, and feed grinding unit gets more work done per day. This often saves manpower, reduces labor charges, helps keep costs down on the farm. How many times has the salesman said, if you buy this tractor for me, you're going to save on time and on manpower?
And money, right?
Save on fuel. The proved economy of the GM diesel engine results from its ability to convert more heat per pound of fuel into useful work. Even if the fuel costs were the same as gasoline, the GM diesel would save you money.
There it is.
Save on manpower, save on time, and save on fuel. Here's the next one. Save on equipment.
There you go.
GM diesel power makes the big tractor economical and practical for light jobs as well as for the heavy work. One GM diesel powered tractor can often do the work of one large and one small tractor and do both light and heavy jobs at a lower cost.
It's all about that money.
If you buy a Detroit, you can cultivate and you can plow, right?
You can do all of it.
All right, so next one. Save on repairs. Have you ever heard that from a salesman?
I've heard that from sales guys all the time.
GM diesels are ruggedly built to work engines manufactured to heavy-duty standards for long life and minimum maintenance. Unit injection fuel system eliminates troublesome high-pressure fuel lines. All working parts are easily replaced. And then the last one is save on weight. Now, I'm not really sure that I believe this with the GM diesel, because those are the heaviest engines ever built.
I've seen some of those GM diesel powered tractors before, and I think you've got one of them yourself. I know that tractor's not the lightest.
We call them, I've got a Super 99 and a 990, and we call them heavies.
They're heavies.
They're heavies.
They are heavy tractors for their size.
If the DOT ever pulls you out, there isn't anything that's light about it.
No, there is.
All right, save on weight. Two-cycle principle with power at every piston downstroke means delivery of equal power from a smaller unit of more power from the same size unit. Consequently, more power per pound of engine weight. GM diesels take up less space and weigh less than any other diesels of comparable capacity. I'm gonna cry bull on that one. They are not lighter.
Good marketing pitch, though. I will say
it is a good marketing pitch.
Good marketing pitch.
Maybe pounds per horsepower. That might be right.
Probably be true.
But takes up less space and weighs less. Nah, I'm not buying that one at all.
I don't know. I haven't seen too many of those that I would say probably weigh less than a 4-cylinder gasoline engine either. So.
But down to the side of this brochure, it says, plus all these other GM features. Push button starting on diesel fuel alone, as simple as starting your automobile. Easy cold weather starting, and they actually developed a hydro starter, and we don't have time to go into it, but you could actually start that engine on air. Safe. No highly volatile fuel, less fire and explosion hazard. Now, you know what? That might be true. I might buy that because you go back to the Ford and the Ferguson tractors that had that gasoline engine that was sitting right on top of the engine. We actually lost one of those in a potato field out there, harrowing potato ground, and it started on fire. And once that engine fire started, you have all of that fuel. You got about 20 gallons of fuel sitting on top of it. You've got time to shut the engine off and get as far away from that tractor as you possibly can. And then anyways, faster acceleration and dependable service everywhere. It was really interesting to go back into the 50s and read some of these brochures, Kyle. It was a great venture to go to Greenville, Illinois. It was a great venture to learn all about the diesel engine and visit with Sherry Schaefer. We appreciate her for being a part of our program, and I absolutely love stuff like this, Kyle.
You know, this stuff's always the things that we like to hear about as we go down the road, and we get to talk to different clients and learn different things as we travel behind the windshield too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, folks, we're down to the end of our fourth segment. We're doing a trial run with our GoPro going down the road. Kyle's driving and I'm talking, and we're just about out of battery, Kyle.
We're getting close to being to the end, aren't we?
Yep. Folks, thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week.
And here now, what are you gonna do now? I'm gonna been on here now, who bid $500,000 bid.
We hope you've enjoyed today's edition of The Legacy of Agriculture with Chris Bair, sponsored by Pfeiffer's Auction, Realty, and Land Management. Call Pfeiffer's at 605-836-2277.